It's strange how certain nights refuse to fade. Years pass, you change jobs, lose touch with friends, grow into a different version of yourself. And still, one particular evening will lie in wait in the back of your mind like a splinter you never quite dug out. For me, that night is the Winter Carnival of 2013 in Maple Falls, Vermont. Every time snow drifts under streetlights, that memory surfaces. The cold in my bones, the smell of fried dough in the air, and the way my pulse wouldn't slow down no matter how much I tried to convince myself everything was fine. Back then, I was 17 and living with my Aunt Karen. My parents' marriage had ended in the kind of messy unraveling where both sides swore they were right, and neither noticed their kid sitting in the middle of the wreckage. My mom moved 3 states away to start fresh, and my dad stayed behind but didn't seem interested in checking whether I was doing okay. Aunt Karen's house was small but warm, and she did her best to fill the space my parents had left. I kept my grades decent, worked weekends at the library, and mostly kept to myself. The exception was Elliot James. Tall, lanky, and always carrying a camera around like it was an extra limb, Elliot had been my closest friend since the 5th grade. He was sarcastic but never mean, and he had this way of noticing details, like the frost collecting on a mailbox or the way people's eyes shifted when they were lying, that made you feel like you couldn't hide anything from him. We'd been through the awkward braces years, failed attempts at learning guitar, and endless afternoons building snow forts in my backyard. That February, Elliot had been talking nonstop about the Winter Carnival. He wanted night shots for his portfolio, Ferris wheel lights against the snow, fireworks over the ice rink. I wasn't in the mood for crowds or cold, but saying no to him felt like saying no to the last piece of normal I had. So on a Saturday night, bundled in 2 sweaters and my heaviest coat, I met him under the big wooden archway at the fairgrounds. Maple Falls might have been a small town, but the Winter Carnival was its claim to fame. People drove in from neighboring counties just to wander the rows of food stalls, try their luck at ring toss, and skate on the temporary ice rink the fire department set up every year. The air smelled like kettle corn and grilled sausage. Elliot was in his element, stopping every few steps to crouch for a better angle, the click of his shutter almost constant. I was halfway through my hot chocolate when I noticed him. Standing near the carousel, a man in a long brown coat and a dark beanie. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. He wasn't smiling, wasn't eating, wasn't talking to anyone, just watching, and I had the unmistakable sense his eyes were on us. I leaned toward Elliot. "You know that guy?" He followed my glance. "Nope. Why?" "He's just, never mind." I told myself I was imagining it. Big crowds made it easy to feel like you were being watched. Still, every time we moved to a different part of the fair, he was there. By the game booths, near the fire pit, off to the side of the stage where the band was playing. When Elliot spotted a perfect vantage point for the fireworks near a row of old storage sheds, I felt my stomach tighten. It was quieter out there, the music and laughter fading behind us. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Karen asking when I'd be home. I looked up from replying and froze. The man in the brown coat was standing in the shadows between us and the nearest light pole. "Elliot," I whispered, "we should go back." "One sec, this shot's perfect." He was bent over his tripod, adjusting the lens, completely absorbed. The man took a slow step toward us, the snow crunching under his boots. Even at a distance, there was something deliberate about the way he moved, like each step had been thought out in advance. I gripped Elliot's sleeve, but he shook me off without looking. "You two from around here?" the man asked. His voice was flat, but there was a trace of something rehearsed in it, like he'd been practicing those words. Elliot hesitated. Yeah." The man's gaze shifted to me, locking on in a way that made my skin feel thinner. "You should be careful walking back alone. Some people get lost out here." "Thought so." A loud crack rang out from behind the sheds, wood breaking or ice snapping. The man's head turned toward the sound. My eyes caught a glimpse of something in his coat pocket. Not the smooth shape of a phone. Bulkier. Heavier. "Elliot. Now." My voice came out sharper than I meant. We hurried toward the main fairgrounds. I didn't look back, though I could feel the heat of his stare. Only when we reached the safety of the crowd did I realize my hands were trembling. Elliot stopped suddenly, his eyes on the camera screen. "Look at this." The last photo he'd taken was blurry, but the man was in it, standing in the dark, smiling. Not just smiling, grinning in a way that made my stomach clench. And behind him, almost hidden by shadow, was another figure. Someone I hadn't noticed at all. I told him we needed to tell security. He said it was probably nothing. "Maybe just someone playing a prank," he muttered. But he didn't delete the photo, and neither of us laughed. We left early. I stayed at his house that night. It was easier than walking home alone. His mom made popcorn and put on an old movie, but I barely registered it. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Through the window, the snow fell steadily, burying the carnival in white. That was the last time I went to the winter carnival. For weeks after, the photo stayed on Elliot's camera. We didn't talk about it much. Sometimes I'd catch him scrolling past it late at night, his thumb hovering over the delete button before moving on. I told myself it was nothing, a weird coincidence, and that we'd been caught up in the tension of the moment. But deep down, I didn't believe that. About a month later, I was walking home from the library when I spotted a long brown coat across the street. My heart jumped before my brain could catch up. The man was halfway down the block, head bent, moving with that same unhurried pace. It might not have been him. I told myself coats like that weren't rare. But when he reached the corner, he stopped, turned his head, looked directly at me. Then he kept walking. I went straight to Aunt Karen's, locked the door, and didn't tell her. I didn't want her thinking I was making things up for attention. Elliot started acting different too. He was quieter, distracted. He'd skip our usual walks after school, saying he had editing to do. One afternoon, I dropped by his place unannounced. His camera was on the kitchen table, the screen lit up. The photo of the man in the brown coat was zoomed in so far the pixels blurred together, but you could still make out the grin. "You're still looking at it," I said. He jumped, like they were together. "It's weird, right? I mean, look at the other guy in the background. Doesn't it seem I leaned over?" The shadowy figure was almost impossible to make out. Broad shoulders, maybe wearing a hood. "I don't know. Could be anyone." "Yeah," Elliot said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. A few nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "You looked cold that night. Dress warmer next time." My chest went tight. I showed it to Elliot the next day, and his face drained of color. "Respond," he said. "Just don't." Don't, but by then I knew. Whoever had been watching us that night at the carnival hadn't stopped. After that text, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I started checking behind me every time I walked home, taking longer routes just to see if anyone was keeping pace. Most nights the streets were empty, but sometimes I'd catch a flicker of movement in the reflection of a shop window, or the crunch of footsteps in the snow that stopped when I stopped. I told myself it was just nerves. That's what fear does. It teaches you to doubt your own senses. One night in March, Elliot called and told me to meet him at the diner. He sounded urgent. When I got there, he was sitting in a booth with his camera bag open and a manila envelope in front of him. He didn't even say hello, just slid the envelope across the table. Inside were printed photos, grainy, taken at night, from a distance. They were of us, at the carnival, at the library, walking home. In one, I was standing at my aunt's mailbox, head down, flipping through letters. "These were in my locker this morning," he said. No note, no explanation. I stared at the photos. "You think it's him?" Elliot nodded slowly. "Look at the angle. They're taken from far away, but always the same height. It's like he's using the same lens every time." I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was, I'd known for weeks something wasn't right. Whoever this was, they weren't just lurking at public events anymore. They were in our neighborhoods. That night, I asked Aunt Karen if I could start staying later at the library to help with closing. She didn't question it, just reminded me to take the well-lit streets home. I didn't tell her about the photos or the text. Part of me thought saying it out loud would make it worse, but the silence didn't keep him away. The last time I saw the man in the brown coat was in early April, a week before the snow melted for good. Elliot had convinced me to walk out to the old railway bridge for some sunset shots. The place was deserted, just a stretch of rusted steel over the river and the faint hum of water below. We were halfway across when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the bridge, hands in his coat pockets, face shadowed by the sinking sun. That grin, I recognized it instantly. "Elliot," I said quietly. "I see him." His voice was tight. He raised his camera like he was about to take a picture, but the man took one slow step forward. Then another. There was nowhere to go except back the way we came. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. The man didn't speed up, didn't shout, just kept closing the distance with that deliberate walk. Halfway back to solid ground, I heard Elliot's shutter click twice, then stop. I didn't look back until we hit the road. When I did, the man was gone. Just empty bridge behind us. We went straight to the police station. They took our statements, glanced at the photos, and said there wasn't much they could do without proof of a direct threat or trespassing. That night, Elliot called and said he'd finally deleted the carnival photo. "Looking at it, he'll stop," he said. I wanted to believe him. Maybe if we stop a week later, he and his mom moved to Burlington. My aunt said it was for a job opportunity, but I never got the real reason from him. We still text sometimes, but we don't talk about the winter carnival. As for me, I still live in Maple Falls. I still walk past the fairgrounds in winter. And every so often, just at the edge of the snow-lit dark, I swear I see a tall figure in a brown coat, standing too still to be anyone in a hurry. Watching, waiting. You can tell yourself it's nothing. You can try to explain it away. But when something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Fear might lie to you, but so can comfort. And sometimes, the worst mistake is convincing yourself there's no danger at all. There are certain mornings that seem ordinary until you look back and realize they were anything but. Years later, you remember every detail: the smell of coffee in the air, the scrape of a chair against tile, the way someone's voice sounded when they said your name. I've carried one of those mornings with me since April 2016, when I was 20, and still figuring out what kind of person I wanted to be. That spring, I just moved to Port Townsend, Washington. It wasn't a big move, just across the state, but it felt like an entirely different world. My cousin offered me a couch in his tiny apartment above a laundromat while I started my first semester at the local community college. The floor shook when the dryers downstairs kicked on. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, and the kitchen was barely big enough for two people to stand in. But it was cheap, and it was temporary. Lena Carter had been my best friend since sophomore year of high school. She'd transferred to the same college a month earlier, fresh off a messy breakup with a guy who seemed to drain the light out of her. We fell back into our old rhythm quickly, spending most mornings together at the Velvet Bean, a cozy coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a bike repair shop. The place had big front windows that looked out over the street, a rotating display of local art on the walls, and a permanent soundtrack of soft indie music. Our corner booth was tucked away from the main flow of customers, just enough privacy to make it feel like our little hideout. On that particular morning, the sky was a uniform gray, and the fog made the fairy horns sound close enough to touch. Lena was doodling in the margins of her notebook, a habit she'd never broken, while I worked through a reading for Intro to Sociology. We'd already downed our first Americanos, and were halfway through our second when the door opened. A couple walked in first, both in their mid-30s, dressed sharp like they'd come from some business meeting. With them was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a faded yellow sweater and clutching a small stuffed rabbit. She had straight brown hair and eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything in the room. Lena followed my gaze. "Cute bunny," she said quietly. "Looks I don't know. Not happy. Weird place to bring a kid, though. I noticed the same thing. Not just the lack of a smile, but the faint bruises along her wrist, just visible when her sleeve slipped. The couple ordered drinks and took a table across from us. They spoke in low, quick whispers, leaning toward each other in what looked like an argument. The girl sat still, gripping her rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. The woman's phone rang and both adults stepped outside to answer it, leaving the girl alone. I exchanged a look with Lena. Something about the way the girl kept glancing toward the door made my stomach knot. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lena asked. "Yeah," I said, already sliding out of the booth. I approached her slowly, crouching down so I wasn't towering over her. "That's a nice bunny. What's his name?" "Hey," I said gently. She hesitated, looking at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. "Oliver," she said finally, voice soft. "That's a good name," I said. "I'm Mia. Is everything okay?" She glanced toward the window where the couple stood with their backs to us, can't talk to people. "They said the way she said it, not whiny, not defiant, just flat, made something twist in my chest. I noticed her nails were bitten down to the skin, some even raw. "Do you want to help me pick out a cookie for Oliver?" I asked, nodding toward the counter. She didn't smile, but she slid off her chair and followed me. Ty, the barista, was polishing mugs. We'd talked before about how he'd handled drunk customers and even broken up a fight in the shop once. I gave him a look I hoped he understood. While the girl scanned the pastry case, Lena pulled out her phone under the table and started typing fast. I knew she was either looking up the non-emergency police number or texting someone who could respond quickly. The door slammed open. The man strode in, his voice tight. "Come here. Now." The girl froze. I stepped in front of her without thinking. She was just, "Not your business," he snapped, stepping closer. His hand reached for her shoulder. Lena stood, voice steady. "Police are on their way." He stopped mid-step. His expression flickered. First anger, then something colder. He glanced at the woman outside, then back at us. "You don't know what you're doing." Ty came around the counter, phone in hand. "Regret," he said evenly. "Might want to leave before you do something you—" The man's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and walked out, yanking the woman by the arm. The girl started crying quietly, her face buried in the rabbit's worn fur. Lena wrapped an arm around her and guided her back to our booth. I sat across from them, watching the window in case the couple came back. Ty called the police, his voice low but urgent. "Possible missing child," I heard him say. "Adults, mid-30s, male and female, left in a hurry. Heading east on Water Street." 2. The officers arrived within 10 minutes. One knelt beside the girl and spoke to her gently, while the other asked us for descriptions and details. I told them about the bruises, the distant look in her eyes, how she said she wasn't allowed to talk to people. Lena added what she'd seen, her tone clipped and certain. When the officers walked the girl outside, one of them paused. "From Kitsap County for 2 weeks, he said. "You did the right thing. She's been reported missing." The door shut behind them, and suddenly the coffee shop felt too quiet. Lena sat back, staring at her untouched drink. "We almost didn't say anything," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. My hands were still shaking. We stayed another hour, just sitting there. Every time the bell over the door jingled, I found myself glancing up, half expecting the man to return. That night, lying on the pull-out couch in my cousin's apartment, I kept replaying it all in my head. The girl's eyes, the bruises, the man's voice when he said we didn't know what we were doing. He was wrong. We knew exactly what we were doing. What scared me was how easily we could have done nothing. The next week, Lena and I went back to the Velvet Bean like normal. We sat in our corner booth, drank our coffee, and pretended everything was the same. But every so often, we'd catch each other glancing toward the door, listening for the sound of a slam or a voice cutting through the room. Ty told us the police had called him later that day to thank him. The girl had been reunited with her aunt, who had custody. The couple was being investigated for multiple charges. That should have felt like closure. Instead, it left me wondering how many other kids like her we never see or choose not to. Months later, Lena and I were walking downtown when we saw a little girl in a yellow sweater across the street. For a moment, I thought it was her. My chest tightened. Then the girl laughed and ran toward her mom, holding an ice cream cone. Lena noticed my expression. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. But it wasn't true. That morning in the coffee shop had changed something in me. It made me realize that the line between being a bystander and making a difference is so thin it can vanish if you blink. We never saw the girl again. I hope she's somewhere safe, that she still has Oliver the rabbit, and that she meets more people who step in instead of looking away. Sometimes when I'm sitting in a coffee shop, I'll catch myself scanning the room without even meaning to. Not looking for trouble exactly, just making sure no one is sitting alone, too quiet, with eyes that seem far away. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Stepping in might feel awkward, inconvenient, or risky, but silence can cost more than you think. You might be the only person willing to act, and for someone else, that can mean everything. It's strange how a memory can feel like it belongs to a dream until you start pulling at the details. The warmth of the air that night, the way the light above the parking lot flickered just a little too slow, the sound of footsteps in a hallway where there shouldn't have been any. That trip in May 2019 was supposed to be nothing more than a much-needed escape, a long weekend away from our cramped apartment, the never-ending hum of college life in Flagstaff, and the kind of stress that makes you feel like your bones are tired. Sophie Hale had been my best friend for 6 years by then. We met in sophomore year of high school. Two awkward kids who bonded over late-night diner coffee and a shared ability to find trouble in small towns. In college, we somehow managed to stay roommates without killing each other, though it meant tolerating the constant sound of her late-night documentaries and my bad habit of eating cereal at 3 a.m. She found the hotel in Santa Fe online, an old roadside place off Route 285 with bright turquoise doors and a neon cactus sign that buzzed faintly in the photos. "It's quirky," she told me, grinning over her laptop. "We'll be like Thelma and Louise without the crime spree." Our first day was exactly what we needed. We wandered through art galleries until our feet ached, bought more turquoise jewelry than either of us could justify, and sat in a hole-in-the-wall restaurant eating green chili enchiladas until the owners gently hinted it was closing time. The air was warm and carried the faint smell of mesquite smoke as we drove back to the hotel, laughing about nothing in particular. And then I saw him. He was standing under the far streetlight at the edge of the lot, hands buried in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if studying something in the dark. The flickering bulb made his outline shift, like a badly cut frame in an old film reel. I wouldn't have thought much of it if not for the way his eyes seemed to lock on us as soon as we pulled in. "Do you know him?" I asked quietly. Sophie glanced his way without slowing down. "Nope, probably just another guest." We got to our room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains tight. Sophie flipped on the TV, her voice casual as she told me not to start imagining things. But something about the way his gaze had lingered stuck with me, like he wasn't just looking, but recognizing. It was close to midnight when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, even, getting closer. Sophie muted the TV. We both sat there waiting. The sound stopped right outside our door. Then came the knock. Not a polite tap, a single, heavy thud against the wood. I went to the peephole. The man from the parking lot stood perfectly still, eyes fixed forward. He didn't sway, he didn't shift, he just waited. We didn't answer. After a long moment, he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps faded, but it didn't feel like he'd gone far. The next morning, we went down for breakfast in the small lobby. I spotted him immediately, sitting alone by the window, stirring his coffee in slow circles, but never lifting it to his mouth. Sophie avoided looking at him, but I couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed us as we walked past. Not a glance, a steady, unblinking track until we stepped outside. We tried to enjoy the day, wandering through museums and lingering over street food, but I found myself checking over my shoulder more than once. No one was there, but that didn't make me feel any better. When we came back that evening, the hallway to our room was empty. We'd just reached our door when I heard it. Footsteps behind us, fast and deliberate. Sophie fumbled with the keycard. I turned just enough to see him. He was closing the distance, his eyes locked on us like they'd been in the parking lot. We slipped inside, the door latching just as he reached it. Another single knock, then silence. The front desk clerk didn't seem particularly concerned when we called. "Ma'am," she said, her voice tinny through the phone. "Unless he tries to enter your room, there's not much we can do. He's probably just another guest." I looked at Sophie, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the remote still in her hand. Her brows knit together. "What if he's not?" I asked the clerk. A pause. Then, "We'll make a note in the system." We hung up, neither of us feeling better. Sophie tried to distract herself with some cooking show, but I found myself staring at the narrow gap between the bottom of the curtains and the carpet. The light outside shifted occasionally when someone passed by. Every time, my heart jumped. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 a.m, I heard the faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Not walking, just one sound, like someone shifting their weight. Then nothing. I told myself it was just the building settling, but I stayed awake until the sun edged over the blinds. The next day, we started avoiding the hallways whenever possible. If we heard voices in the corridor, we waited until they passed before leaving. We stopped taking the elevator and used the stairs closest to the lobby. It was exhausting, but the thought of running into him again in some quiet stretch of carpeted hallway was worse. By the third day, we were counting down the hours until checkout. We planned to leave early, but that evening we made the mistake of staying out just a little too long. When we returned, the parking lot was dim. 2 of the overhead lights had gone out. Sophie quickened her pace, the keycard already in her hand. I was right behind her when I heard the sound again. Footsteps. This time they weren't slow. They were coming fast, closing the space between us. We both turned. He was there, moving quickly, no expression on his face. We reached the door, shoved it open, and slammed it shut behind us. My hands shook as I slid the security latch in place. A knock came immediately, harder than before. Then silence. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat up with the TV on low, half expecting another knock. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing on the highway. By morning, we were ready to leave. We packed in silence, each of us moving like we'd been awake for days. When we carried our bags to the lobby, the clerk at the desk glanced up and said, "Checking out early?" I wanted to tell her everything, the knocks, the footsteps, the way he'd just stood there. But the words felt heavy in my throat. Outside, the air was already warm. We loaded our bags into the car. Sophie shut the trunk, then froze. He was leaning against a silver sedan at the far end of the lot, arms crossed loosely. This time he was smiling. Not a wide grin, just a small, knowing curl of the lips. "Have a safe trip," he said. We didn't answer. We got in the car, locked the doors, and drove. It wasn't until we hit the highway that Sophie spoke. I don't think he was a guest. Neither did I. We drove the first 20 miles in silence, the desert flattening out around us, the morning sun turning everything gold. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that silver sedan trailing us. But the road behind was empty. It wasn't until we stopped for gas near Espanola that we spoke. Sophie leaned against the car, arms folded. "Do you think he knew what room we were in?" she asked. I thought about the knocks, always stopping at our door, never anyone else's. "Yeah," I said. "I think he knew." The rest of the drive to Flagstaff felt longer than the trip out had, every roadside motel and quiet parking lot making me uneasy. It wasn't just fear of him following us, It was the realization that there are people who can insert themselves into your life so quietly, without breaking any law you can prove, and still manage to make you feel hunted. When we got home, I double-checked the locks before I even unpacked. That night, Sophie called her older brother, a police officer in Phoenix, and told him the whole story. He didn't laugh it off. "If it happens again," he said, "call the police right away. And keep records. Times, dates, everything." Weeks went by, and nothing happened. No strange knocks, no unfamiliar cars parked outside our place. But every time I walked down a long hallway, in an office, a hotel, even the school library, I caught myself listening for footsteps behind me. Sophie and I never stayed in budget motels again. We read reviews more carefully, checked parking lots before unloading our bags, and asked for rooms close to the lobby. It wasn't paranoia, so much as realizing how thin the line is between harmless and dangerous, and how often you can't tell which side someone is on until it's too late. Sometimes I wonder who he was, if he really was just another guest. But I keep coming back to one thing. He never had luggage. Not once. I still hear those footsteps sometimes, even in my dreams. Slow at first, then faster, closing the gap. And I always wake up before the knock. Some people you meet by chance, others seem to find you on purpose. The hard truth is, you may never know which kind you're dealing with until you're already too close. Trust the feeling in your gut, even if you can't explain it. Safety doesn't always come from being right. Sometimes it comes from acting before you're sure. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things turned strange. It wasn't like a movie where the music swells and you know something bad is coming. It was quieter than that. The summer of 2017 was my first taste of what I thought was real adulthood. I'd landed an entry-level job at a small publishing company in Richmond, Virginia. A building with creaky floors, fluorescent lights that hummed, and a coffee pot that tasted faintly of burnt toast no matter who made it. I was 23, broke, and living in a one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop with my best friend, Holly Peterson. We'd met during freshman year of college, back when we thought running our own press would be romantic and rebellious. Instead, we ended up proofreading cookbooks about casseroles and answering emails about print delays. Still, it felt like progress. Our office was a strange ecosystem. 15 people total, each with their quirks. Mara, the receptionist who knew everyone's secrets, Phil from layout who wore the same corduroy jacket year-round, and our boss, Ruth, who had a voice like she was always telling you bad news. Holly's desk was in the back near the printers, and mine was up front by the window. We'd wave to each other across the room, usually while sneaking each other sarcastic post-it notes about the day's chaos. For the first month, it was boring in the most comforting way possible. We'd do coffee runs, split sandwiches from the deli next door, and occasionally suffer through awkward office birthday celebrations where everyone stood around singing too quietly. Then, in early August, Daniel Price started. He was in his late 20s, tall but not imposing, with pale skin and a habit of never quite meeting your eyes. Or, when he did, holding your gaze a beat too long. He barely spoke beyond the bare minimum required for work. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people are just reserved. But there was one thing I noticed immediately. He never smiled. Not once. At lunch one day, I mentioned it to Holly. She shrugged, stabbing at her salad. He's probably just shy. She said it like it was the end of the discussion, but I couldn't shake the way he always seemed to be near her. At the printer with no papers, in the break room at the same time she was, walking in from lunch right behind her. Too often to be coincidence. Mara noticed it too. One afternoon, as I was passing the front desk, she leaned in and whispered, "Your friend's got an admirer." Her tone made it sound less like gossip and more like a warning. It started small, sticky notes left on Holly's desk when she was away, never signed, always vague. "You have a nice laugh. Some people don't appreciate you enough." We joked about it at first, assuming some awkward office flirt was testing the waters. But then came the clown figurines. The first one showed up on a Wednesday, a little porcelain clown with a cracked smile sitting on Holly's chair when she arrived. We laughed, called it creepy, and put it on her desk like it was a gag gift. 2 days later, another appeared, then another. By the time there were 4, she started keeping them in a drawer so she didn't have to see them staring at her all day. Around that time, I had my own encounter. I was working late, the office dark except for my desk lamp. I heard the water cooler bubble and turned to see Daniel standing by Holly's desk. He wasn't touching anything, just staring at her empty chair like he was studying it. "Daniel?" I said. He turned slowly, nodded once, and walked past me without a word. I told Holly the next day. She forced a laugh, but her eyes flickered with unease. From then on, we made sure neither of us was in the office alone with him. The turning point came on a Friday morning. I came in early to get a head start before a deadline. The office was quiet, except for the copier humming in the corner. As I walked past the break room, I saw him, Daniel, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. In front of him was a clown figurine just like the others, but this one had a photo tucked under it. A candid shot of Holly, taken from the side, her hair pulled back, wearing an old t-shirt. It wasn't from work. My stomach dropped when I realized it was from our apartment balcony. My voice caught in my throat. "Where did you—" He smiled. For the first time since I'd met him, he smiled. And it wasn't kind. I backed out of the break room, went straight to Holly's desk, and told her to pack her bag. We walked out without telling anyone, my pulse pounding the whole way down the stairs. That weekend, we called the police. It turned out Daniel had a history, a restraining order from a former coworker in another state. The details were enough to make my hands shake while I listened. The company fired him on Monday, but that wasn't the end. Within 2 weeks, Holly started getting envelopes with no return address. Inside each one was a single clown sticker, no note, no explanation. Just the sticker, staring back at her from the kitchen table. We reported it, but nothing came of it. Without proof of who sent them, the police couldn't do much. We changed the locks on the apartment, kept the blinds closed, and avoided walking alone after dark. Holly stopped sitting on the balcony altogether. Months later, the letters stopped. Maybe he got bored. Maybe he moved on. But even now, years later, I still catch myself scanning crowds for his face. Holly and I both carry that summer like a shadow, not always visible, but always there. We never figured out how he got the photos, whether he followed us home or watched from somewhere nearby. Sometimes I think about asking Holly if she still has the clown figurines, but I don't really want to know. It's strange how a person can enter your life so quietly and leave behind something you never shake. I think about that first smile he gave me, how it felt like the air in the room shifted, and I remember deciding, in that moment, that we had to leave right then, without second guessing. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, trust them. Danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in small, unsettling patterns. It's better to act and be wrong than to hesitate and find out you were right too late. Looking back now, it's hard to pin down the exact moment when Eli Carter started slipping away from me. We'd been inseparable once, 2 lanky, restless kids from the same quiet corner of Oregon, always chasing music, adventure, and the next stupid joke that would leave us gasping for air. When I got the offer to move to Seattle for a marketing job, one of my first thoughts was, finally, we'll be in the same city again. He'd been living here since college, bouncing between part-time gigs and odd jobs, but we'd always kept in touch. Those first few months after I arrived, it felt like old times. We'd spend Saturday mornings nursing overpriced coffee from a hipster cafe that insisted on playing vinyl records while arguing about which decade had the best rock albums. On Sundays, we'd lace up our hiking boots and head out to Mount Si or Rattlesnake Ledge, not so much for the scenery, though it was spectacular, but for the chance to just talk about everything and nothing. But somewhere that summer, the rhythm changed. I couldn't tell if he was avoiding me or if life was simply crowding him out. He'd canceled plans last minute, claiming work had called him in, though when I asked about his job, he'd just shrug and change the subject. His texts got shorter. The quick grin I'd known since high school appeared less and less, replaced by a distant look like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. It wasn't until late August that I realized whatever was eating at him wasn't small. That Thursday evening, my phone lit up with his name. His voice when I answered was tight and uneven. "Man, I need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at Lincoln Pier around 10, please?" I almost said no. The pier wasn't the kind of place you met someone for a heart-to-heart after dark. Most nights it was quiet, save for the low hum of the marina and the occasional fisherman smoking in the shadows. But there was something in his tone that cut past my hesitation. "Yeah, I'll be there." When I pulled into the lot, the air smelled like salt and diesel, the water lapping gently against the docks. Eli was leaning against the railing, hood up, hands buried deep in the kangaroo pocket of his sweatshirt. He didn't smile when he saw me, didn't move at all, just tilted his head toward a bench a few feet away. Sitting there was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, lean, wearing a faded leather jacket. He didn't look up, just tapped his foot with an agitated rhythm. Eli's eyes flickered to mine. "This is Mason. I owe him money. A lot of money." At first I thought he was joking. We'd pulled pranks before, staged fake band breakups just to mess with people. But the way he avoided my gaze told me this wasn't one of those times. Mason rose slowly from the bench, closing the distance between us with deliberate steps. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but razor-sharp. "You're the friend," he said, almost like he was confirming a bet. "Watch him disappear. You can help him, or you can—" I let out a half-laugh that died in my throat. "Help him how?" He smiled faintly. "Come with us. We'll sort things out." I looked at Eli, waiting for him to wave it off to tell me this was some sort of overblown misunderstanding. Instead, he just stood there, shoulders hunched, muttering something I couldn't catch. Against every instinct, I nodded. Mason's car was a dented black sedan that smelled faintly of gasoline and stale cigarettes. I drove my own, following them through the industrial district until we reached an abandoned lot near the freight yards. Under the dim orange glow of a single streetlight, 2 more men waited. The next 10 minutes blurred into a mess of raised voices and accusations I barely understood. Mason demanded my wallet and phone. For safekeeping, one of the other men shoved Eli hard in the chest, calling him a liar. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, and then it hit me. Eli had known. He hadn't called me for advice or moral support. He'd called me because I was leverage, a bargaining chip he could put on the table to buy himself time. The betrayal burned hotter than the fear. While one man turned to spit on the ground, I made my move, shoving him aside, sprinting toward the chain-link fence at the far end of the lot. My hands scraped raw as I pulled myself over. I landed hard on the other side, hearing shouts and hurried footsteps behind me. My legs pumped faster than I thought possible until headlights swept across me. A rideshare car, slowing at the sight of my panic, stopped long enough for me to yank open the door and collapse inside. By the time I'd caught my breath enough to speak, the lot was gone behind us. I didn't know if Eli was still there, or if he'd even tried to follow. All I knew was that something had shattered between us that could never be fixed. I didn't go home right away. The rideshare driver, a middle-aged guy with kind eyes, insisted on taking me straight to the police station after I spilled out the short, stuttering version of what happened. He even waited in the parking lot until I came back out. The officer at the desk listened politely, took a few notes, and asked me to describe Mason and the other men. Without photos, without license plate numbers, it felt flimsy even as I said the words. They told me they'd keep an eye out but didn't promise much. "We'll file a report," the officer said, "the way you might tell a child you'd keep a broken toy in case it somehow fixed itself." By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me drained and shaky. I took the longest shower of my life, water pounding against the back of my neck as if it could scrub away what had just happened. but it didn't wash away the image of Eli standing there, watching me get surrounded without moving a muscle. The next morning, I texted him, "We need to talk." No reply. I called, straight to voicemail. I tried again that afternoon, my message sharper this time. "I'm serious." "What the hell was that?" "Call me." Still nothing. By the third day, I drove to his apartment. The blinds were drawn. A thin strip of tape with a realty company logo was stuck to the doorframe, like they'd just changed the locks. When I asked the landlord, a guy in a worn Seahawks hoodie, he said Eli had moved out overnight. Told me he got a job offer back east, left the keys in the mailbox. I knew he was lying, or maybe Eli had lied to him too. Either way, Eli was gone. For weeks, I found myself scanning faces in grocery store lines, watching for him at bus stops, even checking the corners of dim bars when I walked past. Part of me hoped I'd catch sight of him, unshaven and sheepish, ready to explain. But the other part, the part still sore from that night, didn't know if I'd shake his hand or put my fist in his gut. Seattle rolled into fall, damp mornings and gray skies pressing low over the city. I buried myself in work, telling myself that focusing on deadlines and projects would stop me from obsessing over someone who had clearly chosen to disappear. It almost worked, until Mason found me again. I was walking back from a late meeting, cutting through the quieter streets near the marina. I smelled cigarette smoke before I saw him. He stepped out from a shadowed doorway, leather jacket the same as before. "Been a while," he said, smiling faintly. I froze. "Where's Eli?" He took a slow drag from his cigarette, exhaling toward the streetlight. "Some people don't want to be found." "That's not an answer." He tilted his head. "It's the only one you're getting." Before I could press him, a pair of headlights swung down the street. Mason dropped his cigarette, ground it out with his boot, and stepped back into the shadows. By the time the car passed, he was gone. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind replayed his words in a loop, trying to pry meaning from them. Did it mean Eli was hiding by choice? Or that he couldn't come back even if he wanted to? The next morning I filed another police report, but it felt like tossing pebbles into the ocean. They noted it, thanked me, and promised nothing. I told myself to let it go. People change, friends drift apart. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The city felt different now, narrower somehow. Every alley, every dim parking lot seemed like a place I might see Mason again. Winter came early that year, Seattle's streets shimmering with rain that felt colder than snow. By December, I had stopped expecting to hear from Eli, but forgetting him was another matter entirely. It's strange how someone can be absent for months and still be everywhere. In the coffee shop we used to haunt, in the empty space next to me on a trail, in the first few notes of a song we both loved. One Friday night just before Christmas, I left work late and decided to take the long way home along the waterfront. The pier was nearly deserted, the air sharp with salt and diesel, just like the night everything had changed. That's when I saw him. Eli was standing near the far end, hood up, hands stuffed into his pockets. For a second I thought about turning away, pretending I hadn't seen him. But before I could move, he looked up and met my eyes. I walked toward him, every step pulling up a different memory, and every one of them tainted now. He didn't smile, didn't apologize. He just said, "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I shot back. He looked thinner, older somehow, though it had only been a few months. "It's not safe," he said. "For you, or for me?" "Both." I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to demand an explanation for that night, for disappearing, for using me like a pawn. But before I could, Mason appeared out of the darkness, his voice as smooth as the first time we met. "Time to go." Eli didn't argue. He just gave me one last look, not of guilt exactly, but something close, and walked away with him. The sound of their footsteps faded into the wet night air, and I didn't follow. After that night, I stopped looking. Not because I'd stopped caring, but because I understood something I hadn't before. Eli wasn't lost in some mess he wanted to escape from. He'd chosen his path, even if it meant burning the bridge between us. The police report from my first encounter sat in a manila folder in my desk drawer, a quiet reminder of how fast trust can crumble. I never added to it. I didn't call the department again. I didn't walk the marina after dark. I built my life back up slowly, made new friends, took solo hikes, even went to concerts again, though I kept to the back of the crowd. But sometimes, in the middle of a normal day, I'd catch myself scanning faces in a grocery store or a train station, wondering if Eli was out there watching from somewhere I couldn't see. I never saw Mason again. Months later, on a rainy afternoon in March, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words written in Eli's messy scrawl. "I'm sorry, man. I burned it in my sink before I could change my mind." Sometimes the people we trust most will be the ones who put us in harm's way. Loyalty is a powerful thing, but it should never come at the cost of your safety or self-respect. You can care about someone and still choose to protect yourself. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's learning to live with the fact that the person you thought you knew was never quite the person they really were. I never thought much about the way certain days begin. You wake up, make your coffee, check your phone, and carry on under the assumption that it's just another dot on the calendar. But sometimes, looking back, you realize there was something strange in the air from the moment you opened your eyes, like the day had already decided where it was taking you, whether you agreed or not. That Monday morning in late October of 2019 felt like one of those days. I'd been in Cedar Hill for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the town, the slow mornings at the diner, the hiss of buses pulling away from the terminal, the way the forest smelled just before the snow came. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, or at least I tried to. My biggest client, a small press that put out niche graphic novels, had gone radio silent 2 months earlier, leaving me scrambling for rent. I picked up bits of work where I could, pet portraits, commissioned character art for indie authors, but it never quite added up. That night, I'd been visiting my friend Molly in a neighboring suburb. Molly had that sort of warm, bustling apartment where you could lose track of time just listening to her talk. We ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and before I knew it, the clock read 10:47 p.m. "You better hustle if you want to make that last bus," she said, handing me my coat. "You're crashing here." "You miss it," I laughed. "I'll make it. The terminal's, 15 minutes from here?" It ended up being closer to 20, and by the time I reached the Cedar Hill bus terminal, my breath was coming out in sharp clouds. October in Vermont wasn't gentle. The cold had that metallic edge that works its way through gloves and settles in your bones. The place was almost deserted. A flickering vending machine hummed near the entrance. Somewhere in the far corner, a janitor in a faded hoodie pushed a broom slowly, like he had all night to finish the job. I noticed a man sitting on one of the benches, long green coat, shoulders hunched, still as a statue. He looked up briefly when I walked in, and his eyes caught the overhead light just enough to make me look away. I sat 2 benches away from him, hugging my sketchbook to my chest. My phone screen told me I had 8% battery left, just enough to text Molly that I'd made it. The janitor disappeared into a storage closet, and the air seemed to get heavier in his absence. That's when the man spoke. "Do you believe in patterns?" His voice was low, rasping, as though he hadn't used it in hours. I glanced over. Not really sure what you mean." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Some nights, they're designed to happen in a certain way, no matter what you do. You can change the order of the steps, but you can't change where you end up." I gave a small, polite smile, the kind you give strangers when you don't want to encourage more talking. "That so?" He nodded once, eyes fixed on me. "You'll see." Before I could think of a way to end the conversation, the hiss of air brakes filled the room. The last bus had arrived. The relief that came when those headlights spilled across the terminal windows was almost physical. I stood slinging my bag over my shoulder. The bus door opened with a groan and I climbed aboard quickly. The driver wasn't the man I usually saw. Tom, a stocky older guy with a quick smile who liked to tell corny jokes. This driver looked younger, maybe mid-30s, but his face had a drawn, unhealthy pallor. His eyes were sunken, and when he smiled, it didn't seem to reach anywhere near them. "Evening," I said, swiping my pass. He gave a short nod, that strange smile still fixed in place. I chose a seat in the middle out of habit. Close enough to the driver to feel safe, far enough not to be in his mirror constantly. The man in the green coat boarded next, taking a seat 2 rows behind me. The bus pulled away from the terminal, the engine grumbling. The windows reflected the inside lights for the first few blocks, but once we hit the outskirts of town, the glass turned black, showing only the trees sliding past. I told myself it was just a normal ride. In 20 minutes, I'd be unlocking my apartment door, heating up the leftover pasta in my fridge, and curling up under the blanket my grandmother had knitted. But 20 minutes came and went. The road outside was unfamiliar. No gas stations, no street lamps, just dense forest pressing close to the edge of the asphalt. I frowned, leaning toward the aisle to see ahead. After another 10 minutes, I got up and walked to the front. Voice steady. "Is this the Cedar Hill route?" "Excuse me," I said, keeping my... The driver met my eyes in the rearview mirror. That same strange emphasis the man in the terminal had used. "We're getting there. Eventually." His voice had behind me. I heard a low chuckle. The man in the green coat. My fingers tightened on the seat back. "This doesn't look like the route," I said. The driver just smiled again and turned his eyes back to the road. I walked back to my seat, my pulse thudding in my ears. The bus kept going, deeper into the dark. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. In the dim reflection of the window, I could see him, the man in the green coat, leaning slightly forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on me. He didn't blink often. I tried not to panic. Maybe there was some detour, some construction I hadn't heard about. But why hadn't the driver announced it? Why hadn't anyone else boarded? The bus rolled on, the forest outside growing denser, the road twisting in ways I didn't recognize. My phone was dead now, a useless weight in my coat pocket. After what felt like an hour since leaving the terminal, the bus slowed and pulled onto a narrow shoulder. There was no signpost, no houses, not even the faint glow of a distant porch light. The driver turned in his seat to look at me. "This is your stop." I stared at him. "No, it's not. I'm not getting off here." His smile widened, but his eyes stayed flat. "It is tonight." I felt the shift in the air behind me before I saw it. The man in the green coat stood moving into the aisle. His presence filled the narrow space, blocking the way to the back. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "No mistake," the man said softly. "It's just how it goes." The open bus door let in a gust of icy air. I could hear the wind in the trees, a deep rushing sound like the ocean in a seashell. I gripped my sketchbook like it could somehow defend me. My options were slim: push past him toward the back and pray there was an emergency exit, or take my chances out there in the dark. The driver tapped the steering wheel impatiently. Time to move. I took a slow step forward, then another, my mind racing. The ground outside was hard, frozen under a thin skin of frost. The moment I stepped down, the bus door hissed shut behind me. The rumble of the engine faded as it pulled away, leaving me alone with the man in the green coat. The headlights swept over the trees one last time before disappearing. "You'll be fine," he said, "if you keep walking." "Where am I?" I asked. "Somewhere between where you were and where you're going," he said. Then he smiled faintly, as if the words were a private joke. I turned away from him and started walking down the road. My breath puffed white in the dark. My toes ached in my boots, and each step made me more aware of how far I was from anything familiar. Every few seconds I glanced back. The man wasn't following, but he was still there, standing exactly where I'd left him, his silhouette a dark slash against the trees. The road curved sharply, and for a brief moment I couldn't see him anymore. That should have been a relief, but instead my chest tightened. The silence was too complete. No crickets, no rustle of leaves. Just the steady rhythm of my own footsteps. Somewhere ahead, a faint light appeared. I quickened my pace, hope flaring. It turned out to be an old gas station, boarded up and long abandoned. The windows were dark, but a dented metal trash can lay tipped on its side near the entrance. I don't know what made me look behind me then, but when I did, the road was empty. The man was gone. That was almost worse. I kept walking. My legs burned, my hands were numb, and the cold had crept into my jaw so badly that my teeth ached. Eventually, I saw the faint orange glow of a street lamp in the distance. When I reached it, I realized I was less than 3 miles from my apartment. I recognized the curve of the road, the sagging porch of the Miller place, the row of mailboxes leaning toward the ditch. My boots felt too heavy, so I kicked them off and walked barefoot the rest of the way. I told myself it was to be quiet, but really, I think I just wanted to feel the pavement, to know it was solid under me. As I climbed my apartment stairs, I heard it. Soft, distant laughter carried on the wind. It wasn't close, but it was clear enough to make my skin prickle. Inside, I locked the door and slid down against it, clutching my sketchbook. I stayed like that until the first light of morning bled through the blinds. I never saw the man in the green coat again. I never saw that driver again either. But some nights, when I'm walking home late, I'll see the headlights of a bus cutting through the dark in the distance, and I'll cross the street just in case. People always ask what I think really happened that night. I tell them the truth. I don't know. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe it was a mistake. Or maybe it was one of those nights, the kind the man talked about, the kind that's designed from the start. Some warnings come too late, but the ones we notice in time are only useful if we act on them. Trust your instincts, even when you can't explain why. They might be the only thing standing between you and the point of no return. Leah Simmons had been my constant since our sophomore year at the University of Oregon. We'd met in a cramped literature seminar, both of us late, both fumbling for the last 2 empty seats in the room. She'd looked at me with a lopsided grin and whispered, "Guess we're in trouble together." That was it. Our friendship was set. Over the years, we'd lived in the same apartments, nursed each other through breakups, celebrated each other's promotions, and spent too many late nights wandering dim streets just to keep talking. Life had scattered us a bit. I landed in a small apartment on the east side of Portland, while she found a cozy duplex across town. But Friday afternoons were sacred. That was when we'd meet at Maple Grind, our little corner cafe that always smelled like warm pastries and cinnamon. The cafe wasn't much to look at. Mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and a few chipped mugs that regulars quietly claimed as theirs. But it had the right kind of quiet, enough chatter to feel alive, enough stillness to let conversations stretch. That's where we unpacked our weeks, leaning across the table over lattes, swapping stories about bad bosses and strange dreams. It was late March 2021 when things shifted. That Friday, rain had been falling since dawn, soaking the sidewalks and turning the streets into mirrors. I was stuck in traffic, watching the minutes tick past our usual meeting time. By the time I pushed through the cafe door, shaking off the wet, Leah was already there at our spot by the window. She had her coffee untouched in front of her, hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to draw heat from it. "You okay?" I asked, dropping into the seat across from her. She hesitated just a little too long. "Yeah, just tired." But I'd known Leah for almost a decade, and I could read the tension in the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her eyes kept darting toward the counter. That's when I saw him, tall, in a black raincoat that dripped onto the floor, standing too still while waiting for his order. His gaze moved over the room until it settled on us, lingering a beat too long. We tried to keep our conversation going, but it was forced. Leah's voice was thin, her laugh non-existent. The usual hum of the cafe was different that day, quieter, with the occasional low murmur between the baristas. One of them, a young guy with a mop of dark hair, kept pacing behind the register, glancing toward the door like he was expecting trouble. Leah leaned forward as if to say something important, but before she could, the man in the raincoat stepped up to our table. His presence was immediate and wrong, like a shadow falling over a sunny patch. "Leah," he said, his voice soft but sharp at the edges. "You weren't answering my calls." The color drained from her face. She whispered my name under her breath, not as a greeting, but as a plea. "This is Evan," she said quickly, barely looking at me, back to me. "He's been showing up places. My ex." Her eyes flicked toward him. Then I pushed my chair back and stood. "She doesn't want to talk to you." His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "This isn't your business." Before I could answer, the barista called from behind the counter, voice loud and steady. "Sir, you need to leave." That's when Evan reached into his coat. My mind jumped to the worst. A flash of cold certainty that I was about to watch something irreversible happen. But instead of a gun, he pulled out a switchblade. The metallic click echoed in the stillness as the blade snapped open, its point aimed at me. Everything slowed. Leah's sharp inhale, the scrape of a chair leg against tile, the smell of burnt espresso in the air. Then movement exploded as a man by the door lunged at Evan, tackling him from behind. The knife clattered across the floor, spinning once before sliding under a table. The room erupted into shouts, chairs tipping over, coffee spilling. I grabbed Leah's arm and yanked her toward the back exit. Her hand was ice cold in mine as we slipped on the wet floor, pushing through the door into the alley. Rain hit our faces like needles, but we didn't stop running until we reached the next block. We ducked under the awning of a closed bookstore, both of us gasping for breath, rainwater dripping from our hair and coats. Leah leaned against the wall, her face pale and drawn, eyes darting in every direction like she expected Evan to materialize out of the shadows. "You have to tell me what's going on," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. She swallowed hard. "It's been weeks. He's been outside my place at my job. I thought maybe if I ignored him." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to drag you into it." The sound of distant sirens cut through the rain. I didn't realize my fists were clenched until I felt my nails biting into my palms. Too late for that. "We're going to the police." Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up near the cafe. We walked back slowly, cautious, but the scene was already under control. Evan was cuffed, his raincoat dark with water, his face unreadable as he was led into the back of a cruiser. The man who'd tackled him gave us a nod as if to say, "Don't mention it." Inside, officers took our statements. I could feel Leah trembling beside me, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. The knife sat in an evidence bag on the counter, its blade catching the fluorescent light in sharp glints. The officer in charge explained that Evan would be booked, but bail was possible. "We'll process a restraining order," he said, "but it'll take some time." His tone carried that bureaucratic weariness that told me this was far from his first case like this. When we stepped back out into the rain, Leah looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the day had pressed her into herself. "Can I stay at your place?" she asked quietly. "Of course." That night, she curled up on my couch under an old quilt, the television flickering in the background. I sat in the armchair pretending to read, but really just listening for any sound outside. Days turned into weeks. Leah stayed with me, leaving only for work, and even then, never alone. She changed her number, deleted her social media accounts, and avoided answering the door unless we were expecting someone. Every creak of the hallway made her tense. Every unfamiliar face on the street drew her eyes. I started to understand the slow erosion of normal life that comes with being watched. It wasn't just the fear of what Evan might do. It was the constant uncertainty of when. Even in the safety of my apartment, I caught myself double-checking locks, glancing at the windows, wondering if some part of him was still out there. The restraining order came through eventually, a thin sheet of paper that felt laughably inadequate against the memory of that knife. Still, it gave Leah something to hold on to, proof that someone in authority had acknowledged what she'd been through. One night, over takeout containers and half-watched sitcom reruns, Leah admitted she hadn't been honest with me about how bad things had gotten before that day at the cafe. "He followed me home from work once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't try anything, just stood across the street for hours. I thought, maybe I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to be a burden. I put down my chopsticks. Leah, you're my best friend. You can't be a burden, but you could have been." I stopped myself before finishing the sentence. She nodded, eyes fixed on the untouched lo mein in front of her. I know. The rain outside tapped against the window like it was marking time, reminding us both that the city was still out there, and so was he. By the time summer edged into the city, the rain had given way to long, dusty afternoons and evenings that lingered just past 9. Leah had been back at her own place for a few weeks, though I still called every night to check in. She sounded better most of the time, steadier, like she was learning to breathe normally again, but the undercurrent of caution never left her voice. One Thursday, she invited me over for dinner. The table was set with mismatched plates and a bottle of wine we'd been saving since college, waiting for the right time. We laughed over old stories, traded work gossip, and for a moment it felt like we'd reclaimed something. Then, halfway through clearing the dishes, I saw her freeze. She was staring at the front window, my body tensed before I even turned to look. Across the street, a man was leaning against a lamppost, half in shadow. He wasn't wearing the raincoat, but the posture, too still, too deliberate, triggered something in me. "It's not him," Leah said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. "It's just someone." But she didn't sound sure. Neither was I. We sat back down, pretending to finish our drinks, our eyes drifting toward the glass every few seconds. When I finally looked again, the lamppost was empty. After that night, I stopped believing in clean endings. In the months that followed, Leah learned to live with the possibility of him reappearing. She got a security camera, took self-defense classes, and kept her phone close at all times. I stayed close too, not because she needed protecting, but because I understood the quiet devastation of knowing the worst moment of your life could repeat itself without warning. The last time we talked about Evan, we were sitting on a park bench watching kids play tag. She told me she'd stopped wishing for him to be caught again. Instead, she hoped he'd simply forget about her. "That's the scariest part," she said, "not knowing if you're still in someone's head." I didn't have an answer. We just sat there, the late afternoon sun slanting through the trees, until it was time to go. In the end, what happened at Maple Grind wasn't just about one dangerous man or one frightening afternoon. It was about how easily safety can shatter, how quickly the ordinary can tilt into something you don't recognize. I learned that when someone you care about is in trouble, you can't wait for them to ask for help. You step in, even if you don't understand the whole story, because fear thrives in silence, and the people who love you are the only ones loud enough to drown it out. The night Denver changed for me didn't begin with gunshots. It began with the sound of Ryan Mitchell's laugh echoing off the walls of our ambulance bay, bouncing between steel lockers and the faint smell of diesel. That laugh had been part of my life for years. We met back in 2011, two rookies sweating through paramedic training, learning how to start IV lines on each other's arms, how to run toward trouble when everyone else ran away. Ryan was sharp under pressure, the guy who could joke with a stabbing victim to keep them conscious while I worked on the bleeding. Our friendship wasn't just forged in training manuals and hospital hallways. We'd swapped couches when relationships imploded, split rent when money got tight, and drank together in the kind of dim-lit bars that welcome exhausted first responders without questions. It wasn't the kind of friendship you thought about. It was just there, steady as the sound of the monitor in the back of the rig. By 2016, we'd been partners for 5 years. October that year was unusually cold, the kind of cold that seemed to seep through your coat and settle in your bones. It was late one Friday night. our shift dragging past the 12-hour mark, when the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Reported shooting, multiple callers, outside a place called the West Point Motel. My first thought was that the West Point was trouble even in daylight. We pulled up to flashing blue and red, the cold air stinging as soon as I opened my door. A young man lay on the pavement in front of the motel office, his hoodie soaked dark in the center of his chest. Officers were already on scene, waving us forward. I knelt beside him, cutting away fabric, searching for an entry wound. "Ryan, hand me the occlusive dressing," I said without looking up. Silence. "Ryan." I turned and saw him standing a few feet away, hands still at his sides, eyes locked on the victim's face. His expression wasn't shock exactly. It was something heavier, a recognition that didn't belong here. I called his name again, sharper this time. He blinked, moved toward me, handed over the dressing like his mind was somewhere else entirely. We worked the case, but the kid was gone before we even left the scene. Back in the rig, Ryan sat in the passenger seat without a word. I let it go. We all handled loss differently, but in the weeks that followed, his silence didn't fade. The changes were subtle at first. A missed shift here, a few too many beers after work there. Ryan was always one to blow off steam, but now it felt different, quieter, like he was trying to bury something. He started dodging my questions, turning conversations toward anything but that night at the West Point. Then one evening in early November, he showed up at my apartment without warning. His face looked thinner, skin pale under the porch light. "That kid," he said before I even asked him in, "at the motel, he was my cousin." I stepped aside and he came in, pacing my living room. "I didn't know he was running with those guys," Ryan went on. "Trigger. And they know I know. But I think I know who pulled the words landed like stones. I wanted to tell him we needed to go to the police, but he cut me off. "No, it'll make things worse. You have no idea what these people will do." I'd seen Ryan calm in rollover accidents and house fires, but now his voice shook like the cold had finally reached his bones. He stayed an hour, long enough to drink half a cup of coffee and swear me to silence. When he left, I stood in the doorway long after his taillights faded, wondering what kind of trouble had just walked into my life with him. The days after Ryan's confession felt heavier, like the air itself carried weight. At work, he was half present, his eyes scanning corners and alleyways as we drove. I told myself it was just paranoia bleeding over from his grief. But that theory started to crumble one Tuesday afternoon on a run to a cardiac arrest. We were rolling down Colfax when I noticed a black SUV in the left lane, keeping perfect pace with us. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about traffic shadowing us, but when we turned onto Grant Street, it turned too. A few blocks later, when we switched routes after hitting construction, the SUV appeared again in the mirror. "See that?" I asked. Ryan glanced back without turning his head. "Yeah, ignore it." That was the first time I realized he'd already noticed, and that he wasn't surprised. It didn't end there. Over the next week, the SUV showed up twice more. Once while we were parked outside the ER, once as we were returning to the station. Each time, it would linger just long enough for me to be certain, then vanish into traffic like smoke. Then came the message. It was a Friday night, bitterly cold, and I was leaving the station after paperwork when my captain's voice called me back. "You're gonna want to see this," he said, leading me outside to the far side of the building. Spray painted across the aluminum siding in uneven red letters, "You talk, you're next." The paint was fresh, glistening under the security lights. The words seemed to vibrate in the cold air, sharp as a blade. I felt my hands go cold inside my gloves. The captain didn't ask questions. He just called the police. Officers came, took photos, asked if anyone had enemies. I kept my answers clipped, but my mind was already replaying Ryan's voice that night in my apartment. "They know I know." When I told him about the graffiti, his face darkened. "You went to the captain?" "I had to," I said. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're threatening all of us." "You don't get it," he snapped. "The more attention you bring, the closer they'll get." I pushed back hard, and for the first time in all our years, the air between us felt hostile. We didn't ride together the next shift, we didn't speak for days. By the following week, he'd taken a leave of absence. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. His locker stood half open, a pair of boots inside like he'd be back any minute. But he never returned. Months passed without a word. I told myself he was hiding out somewhere safe, that he'd call when things settled. The truth came 2 years later, on a bright autumn afternoon, when I saw him standing across the street at a busy intersection. He looked older, thinner, eyes shadowed, wearing a plain ball cap pulled low. He didn't wave, didn't cross over, just watched me for a moment, unreadable, and then turned into the crowd. I don't know if he was there to warn me, or to make sure I remembered the deal we never made but somehow lived by: silence in exchange for survival. I didn't see Ryan again after that afternoon, but his absence didn't fade like I thought it would. It became part of the city for me, a missing piece I felt whenever we drove past the West Point Motel, or when I passed a black SUV in traffic and found my pulse quickening without reason. Work went on. Partners came and went, each with their own quirks and rhythms, but no one ever filled the space Ryan left. That's the thing about people you've shared life and death moments with. They don't get replaced. They stay in your bones. Some nights after a rough call, I'd find myself walking past his old locker. The boots were gone now, replaced by another medic's gear, but the faint scuff marks on the floor were still there. I'd think about how fast things unraveled. One call, one body on the pavement, and a lifetime of loyalty turned into a story I couldn't explain to anyone outside of it. What gnawed at me most wasn't just the threat we faced, but the truth Ryan carried. If he knew who pulled the trigger that night, then somewhere out there, someone had gotten away with murder. And because of fear, his and eventually mine, we'd let that truth rot in the dark. I tried once to track him down. Called an old roommate of his, reached out to a mutual friend from training. They'd say, if he's smart, he's keeping it that way. And maybe that was the point. Staying gone was survival. Staying silent was protection. For him, for me, for anyone who'd ever been within arm's reach of that motel's front door. But silence comes with a cost. It eats away at you, a slow erosion that doesn't stop. Every time I rolled past a call that looked routine, a bar fight, a domestic, a shooting in the bad part of town, I felt the weight of what we didn't do, the name we never said, the case that never made it into the system. I still don't know if Ryan blames me for going to the captain. I don't know if he was grateful, furious, or just resigned. All I know is that day at the intersection, when he turned away, I felt something close for good between us. Not because of what happened, but because of what we both chose afterward. To live with it in the shadows. The moral I carry from it is sharper than I'd like to admit. Loyalty is noble, but when it's weighed against justice, you have to decide what you can live with. Protecting someone you care about might mean letting the truth die, and the real danger is learning you can. I still answer every call that comes in. I still show up, run toward the chaos, do my job. But there's a part of me now that listens for the echo of a black SUV in the street behind us, or looks twice at the stranger in the crowd. Not out of fear exactly. Out of the knowledge that some stories don't end. They just stop being told. There are some friendships you don't drift away from, no matter how much time passes or how different you become. Caleb Moore was mine. If my life was a series of orbits, he was the sun I kept revolving around, even when I knew I should break free. We met in the 4th grade, when he punched a kid in the nose for stealing my lunch money. It wasn't some noble act of justice. Caleb just liked to fight. But to me, it felt like someone had decided I was worth standing up for. We were inseparable after that. Sleepovers, detention slips, late-night bike rides through the bad parts of town. I could see why my parents didn't trust him. They didn't see the kid who'd patch my scraped knees with Band-Aids stolen from his mom's bathroom cabinet. They only saw the boy who set fire to a neighbor's mailbox just to see what would happen. By the time I was 19, I'd run out of excuses for why my life wasn't moving forward. I'd dropped out of community college after my first semester. The lectures bored me, the assignments felt pointless, and the longer I sat in those cramped classrooms, the more I thought about leaving. My parents were furious. My dad, a machinist who'd worked the same job for 3 decades, believed quitting was a permanent stain. He didn't yell much when I was growing up, but that spring, it seemed like every conversation turned into a fight. The night it all boiled over, we were in the kitchen. My dad leaned on the counter, arms crossed, voice sharp. "You think the world owes you something?" I never said that. "You don't have a plan, you just quit. Better than wasting years doing something I hate." He shook his head like I was speaking another language. My mom stayed quiet in the doorway, her arms folded tight. I felt the heat rise in my chest. "You know what? Forget it," I said, grabbing my jacket. "I don't need this." I stormed out and didn't look back. I walked 2 blocks before I pulled out my phone and called Caleb. He answered on the second ring. "You sound like someone who needs a beer," he said. "Or 10, I muttered. "Can you pick me up?" "Already on my way." When his Toyota pulled up, music blared so loud the bass rattled the side mirrors. He grinned at me through the open window. "Forget them," he said. "You don't need to listen to anyone, you've got me." I climbed in, and for the first time that night I felt like I could breathe. The first week on Caleb's couch was a blur of greasy takeout, midnight walks, and card games that lasted until sunrise. It felt like a vacation from my own life. No lectures, no disapproving glares, no questions about what I was going to do next. Caleb had a way of making the world feel like it was ours. We'd sit on his balcony, smoking cheap cigarettes, watching the lights of the city like they were put there just for us. But under that easy freedom, I started noticing things that didn't add up. He'd vanish for hours without saying where he was going. Sometimes he'd come back smelling faintly of sweat and cigarette smoke, his clothes rumpled, his eyes sharp like he'd been wired on adrenaline. Other times, he carried thick stacks of cash that he shoved into a locked metal box under his bed. The box was dented, its paint chipped, and he never left it out of sight for long. One night he came home with a black eye and a split lip. "What the hell happened?" I asked. "Bar fight," he muttered, tossing his jacket on the couch. "Since when do you go to bars that punchback?" He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about it." 2 nights later, while Caleb was in the shower, there was a knock at the door. Without thinking, I opened it. A man stood there, maybe mid-40s, tall and broad, wearing a leather jacket. His eyes were flat and cold. "Tell Caleb I'll see him Friday," he said. "And if he's not there, we've got a problem." He walked off before I could say a word. When I told Caleb later, he froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. "Yeah, that's nothing. Don't worry about it." But I did. And when Friday came, my worry turned into something heavier. Caleb was gone all night Friday. I tried calling, texting, nothing. Every creak of the apartment building made my stomach knot tighter. Just after sunrise, the door opened. Caleb stepped in, pale and sweating, eyes bloodshot. He tossed the locked box into a backpack, zipped it, and said, "We need to leave, now." "What's going on?" I demanded. "I'll explain later. Just grab your stuff." "No, tell me now." He looked at me, jaw tight. "You'll understand soon." We drove in silence, the city shrinking behind us. He headed toward the industrial outskirts, where empty factories sat like rusting skeletons. Finally, he pulled behind a boarded-up warehouse and killed the engine. "Stay in the car. I mean it." I watched him disappear through a side door. Minutes later, shouting erupted inside, followed by a metallic crash. My hands gripped the seat so tight my knuckles hurt. Then Caleb burst out, running full tilt, a shadow close behind him. He dove into the driver's seat, slammed the car into gear, and we tore out of the lot. Halfway back to town, he finally spoke. "I've been running stolen electronics for a local crew. Missed a delivery. They think I stole from them. And that guy at the door? They know who you are now, which means you're not safe either. After that night, things changed. Caleb stopped calling as much. I packed my things and went back to my parents' place. They didn't ask for details and I didn't offer any. It was tense, but safer. Weeks turned into months. I thought about reaching out, but every time I pictured that leather-jacketed man's cold eyes, I let the thought die. Then one afternoon, a postcard showed up in the mail. No return address, no picture. Just a sentence scrawled in Caleb's uneven handwriting. Better you stay away from me. It's safer. I've kept it in my desk drawer ever since. It's been years now. I never saw Caleb again. Sometimes I wonder if he's still alive, still running, or if one of those problems finally caught up to him. Part of me hopes he made it out. Another part knows people like Caleb rarely do. Loyalty is powerful, but it can also pull you under. Loving someone doesn't mean following them into the fire. Sometimes the best way to save a friend is to let go before the flames take you both. If you've ever had a best friend who feels more like an extension of yourself than another person, you know how hard it is to tell them no. Noah Bennett had been that for me since we were 16. We bonded over skateboarding, skipping class for greasy tacos, and playing in a garage band that was more noise than music. In high school, we were always in motion, never worried about where we were going. But somewhere between graduation and our mid-20s, life started picking sides. I ended up on the slow, predictable track, a stable desk job in downtown Austin, paying bills on time, eating dinner in front of the TV most nights. Noah took the opposite road. He bounced between construction jobs, delivery gigs, bartending shifts, always a temporary thing because he was always chasing the next big plan. I think he liked being untethered, though it worried me in ways I couldn't explain without sounding like a parent. We didn't see each other as much anymore, maybe once every couple of weeks for a beer. But the bond never went away. So when my phone buzzed late one night in September 2019, his name on the screen, I answered without hesitation. "Hey man, can you pick me up? I'm at the old rail yard. Don't ask questions, just come." There was a tightness in his voice, not fear, exactly, but something close, like he was trying not to let it show. "You okay?" I asked. "Just come get me." I almost said no. I had work in the morning. But I grabbed my hoodie and keys, because history had taught me one thing about Noah. When he said, "Don't ask questions," he didn't mean it as a suggestion. The rail yard sat on the east side of the city, a place that looked abandoned even during the day. At night, it felt like a set piece for trouble. The only light came from a flickering street lamp and the glow of a freight train crawling past in the distance. I spotted movement near a stack of rusting shipping containers. Noah emerged, breathing hard, clutching a black duffel bag like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. His clothes were damp, his hair stuck to his forehead, and there was a dark smear on his sleeve that I couldn't stop looking at. "Drive," he said, yanking open the passenger door. I pulled away without asking where we were going, but I couldn't ignore how his hands shook as he fumbled with the seatbelt. "You hurt?" I asked. "No. That's blood on your arm." "It's not mine." The way he said it made my stomach knot. He started directing me through turns that didn't make sense, cutting across neighborhoods, doubling back, avoiding the main roads. Finally, I pulled over in an empty lot behind a strip mall. "Noah, tell me what's going on, or I'm done." He kept his eyes on the windshield. "I messed up," he said finally. "I was supposed to deliver something for a guy I've been working for, not the kind of guy you say no to, but I saw what was in the package, and I couldn't do it." I didn't ask what it was. His tone told me enough. "They saw me leave," he added quietly. "I don't think they're gonna let me walk away." At first I thought he was being paranoid. Noah had a habit of assuming the worst in people, but 20 minutes later, when headlights appeared behind us holding steady no matter which turn I took, the paranoia became mine too. "Is that them?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, without looking back. I cut through side streets. then into a quiet residential area. The car stayed with us. We ditched mine behind a closed supermarket, grabbed the duffel, and ran through backyards, trying to avoid motion lights. My heart pounded so hard it felt like I could hear it in my ears. When we finally reached my apartment, I locked the door, killed the lights, and tried to catch my breath. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the transcript, it was only 5 words. "We know where you live." For the next week, Noah didn't leave my apartment. Curtains stayed drawn, TV stayed off. We barely spoke, except for quick exchanges about food or the bathroom. The silence pressed on me until it was almost unbearable. On the 8th morning, I woke to find the couch empty, the duffel gone, and no sign of forced entry. Just gone. The strangest part about waking up to find Noah gone wasn't the empty couch. It was the quiet. For a week, even when we weren't speaking, there was still the sound of him moving around, opening the fridge, pacing the living room at 3 in the morning. Now, the apartment felt hollow, like the air itself had been vacuumed out. I checked my phone first, half expecting a text. Nothing. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. No social media posts, no tags, no updates. It was as if he'd been erased. That day, I went to work like nothing had happened. My coworkers asked if I was feeling all right, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I told them I was fine. That's what you do when you can't tell the truth without inviting trouble you don't understand. That night, I found myself replaying the rail yard in my head, the way Noah had been breathing, the blood on his sleeve, the weight of that duffel, the headlights in the rear view, the voice on the voicemail. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? My friend was carrying something for a criminal. They followed us home. Now he's gone. That wouldn't end with help. It would end with questions I couldn't answer and doors I couldn't close again. 3 nights later, I woke up from a dream where Noah was standing in my kitchen asking me for water like nothing had happened. Only in the dream, when I turned to get a glass, he was gone again. That part felt real enough to make my chest ache when I woke. Weeks passed like that. The tension faded slowly, like a bruise changing color. But every time I heard footsteps behind me or saw a car in my mirror for too long, the old fear came rushing back. I never told my parents. I never told anyone, really. It became my own little sealed vault of memory, one I kept locked because opening it meant letting all the danger spill back out. It was mid-November when the postcard arrived. The front was blank white, no picture, no stamp besides the one required to mail it. My address was written in Noah's uneven handwriting. On the back, there were just 8 words. "Better you stay away from me. It's safer." No return address. No clue where it had been sent from. I read it 3 times before setting it down. There was no date, but I could imagine him writing it in some dim motel room, the duffel on the bed, eyes on the door. Maybe he'd been moving every night since he left. Maybe he was already somewhere far away. Or maybe he wasn't alive anymore. That thought crept in like a shadow and never really left. I kept the postcard in my desk drawer, under a stack of utility bills and old photos. Every few months I'd take it out just to see if it felt different. It never did. It was like holding a frozen piece of time, a reminder that I'd been pulled into something I didn't understand and barely escaped. In the years since, I've learned to live with not knowing. People like to believe that if you care about someone enough, you can pull them back from wherever they're heading. But sometimes their road is already too far gone, and all you can do is watch them disappear around the bend. I still see them sometimes, not in person, but in strangers on the street, in a laugh from a passing table at a bar, in the way someone wears a baseball cap low over their eyes. I don't know if I'd even want him to reach out again. The truth might be worse than the mystery. But the thing about Noah Bennett is, he's the kind of gravity you never fully escape. Some people we love are storms, beautiful, wild, unforgettable, but dangerous to stand too close to. You can care for them from a distance, but stepping into their world can mean losing your own. Sometimes survival means letting go before the sky breaks open. By April 2022, Chicago felt more like a maze than a city. I'd been here long enough to know the shortcuts through alleys and the way the lake wind cut through your clothes, no matter how many layers you wore. But my life was on autopilot. Grad school classes in the mornings, part-time shifts at the bookstore in the afternoons, and collapsing into bed most nights with a half-read textbook on my chest. Harper Lane had a way of breaking patterns. We'd met during freshman year at Northwestern. She was the kind of girl who walked into a room like she already owned it, even if it was just a study lounge at 2 a.m. I was the quieter one, the person who watched the party from the edge until someone like Harper dragged me into the middle of it. Our friendship was built on that imbalance, her daring, my caution. When she called that Thursday night, I hadn't seen her in over a year. She'd moved to LA chasing some whirlwind romance with a guy she swore was different. From the photos she sent back then, they'd looked like a perfect match. Rooftop drinks, weekend trips, him holding her waist like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. Then the photos stopped and Harper's text got short. Her voice over the phone that night was all energy. "New job, new city, new me," she said. "Come out and celebrate. Warehouse art show, industrial district. Don't say no." I hesitated. I had a midterm paper due and a shift at the bookstore the next morning. But Harper's invites weren't really requests. They were momentum pulling you somewhere whether you were ready or not. The warehouse was as far from a formal gallery as you could get. Dim light pooled in corners. Graffiti climbed the brick walls, and the bass from a DJ booth in the back made the concrete floor hum under my sneakers. People moved like they were part of the art. Leather jackets, glitter on their faces, tattoos catching the flicker of colored lights. Harper was at my side instantly, drink in hand, wearing a red coat that made her stand out even in that chaos. We caught up in fragments. Her job was complicated but fun, her apartment tiny but mine. I was about to tell her about the bookstore when I noticed she kept glancing toward the main entrance. "You looking for someone?" I asked. She forced a laugh. "Just people watching." But her hand wrapped tighter around her glass. It happened fast. One moment, Harper was leaning in to tell me something over the music. The next, her eyes locked on the door and her whole expression shifted. No more smile, no more careless confidence. Just tension, sharp and sudden. The man in the gray bomber jacket was taller than most of the crowd, which made it easy to see him even from across the room. He didn't look around like everyone else. His eyes found Harper like he'd been tracking her from the second he stepped inside. Her fingers gripped my arm. "We have to go. Now." I started to ask why, but she was already moving, tugging me toward a side exit between 2 graffiti-covered panels. The cold night air hit like a slap, but she didn't slow. We were halfway to the street when the black SUV cut us off, tires screeching against the cracked asphalt. The man from inside the warehouse got out. Another man stepped around the hood, both of them blocking the narrow lane. The one in the bomber jacket smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you return. "Leaving so soon, Harper?" His voice was smooth, practiced. "You still owe me a conversation." My pulse jumped. Harper muttered under her breath, "Don't talk, just run." But the 2 men stepped forward, closing the gap. One reached into his jacket. I didn't want to find out what for. I shoved Harper toward a side alley, the sound of my sneakers slapping the wet pavement louder than my breathing. We weaved between dumpsters and broken pallets, until the alley opened onto a busier street bathed in the safety of streetlights. We ducked into the first crowded place we saw, a late-night diner that smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. We slid into a booth near the back, both of us trying to look like we belonged there. My hands shook when I picked up the menu. "Okay," I said, voice low. "What the hell was that?" Harper's eyes were fixed on the window, scanning the street outside. She hesitated before speaking. "That guy. His name's Evan. I met him in LA. We dated. At first it was fine. He was charming. Always knew where the best rooftop bar was. Always made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. But when I broke it off, things changed. He started showing up at places I didn't tell him I'd be. Friends saw him parked outside my building. I moved here to get away from him. I stared at her, and now he's here. Guess I'm not as good at disappearing as I thought, she said bitterly. We stayed in that diner for hours, ordering nothing but coffee, watching the door. Around 2 a.m. we called a rideshare and went to my apartment. I offered her my bed, but she insisted on the couch. Neither of us slept. Every creak in the hallway made us freeze. The next morning I made coffee and tried to act like things were normal. She said she'd handle it, and that I didn't need to get involved. But the edge in her voice told me she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. The days that followed felt like walking around with a live wire in my chest. I still went to work at the bookstore, still attended classes, still sat in my cramped apartment at night. But everything felt thin, like I was living on the surface of something dark and restless. Harper stayed on my couch, her suitcase wedged between the wall and the coffee table like she was ready to bolt at any moment. She didn't leave much, a quick trip to the corner store, a smoke break on the fire escape. And when she did, she came back scanning the street behind her. Every time I asked if she'd gone to the police, she brushed it off. "You don't get it," she said one night, staring into her cup of tea. "Guys like him don't get scared because a cop takes a report. All it does is make them angrier." We started a quiet routine. I'd head to class in the morning. She'd stay in the apartment. Sometimes I'd catch her at the window looking out like she was expecting to see that SUV parked below. She never said his name again after that first night. Then the texts started. Not to me, to her. I'd hear her phone buzz and watch her shoulders stiffen as she read whatever had come through. She never let me see the screen, but I didn't need to. Her hands shook, her eyes got glassy, and she'd set the phone face down like it was something alive and dangerous. On the 5th night, we were eating takeout on the couch when her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then locked the screen without touching her food. "I think I should go," she said softly. "Go where?" "Somewhere he can't find me." I wanted to argue, to tell her that running wouldn't solve anything, but the truth was I didn't have another solution. I couldn't promise she'd be safe here, and that felt like failure. I woke up the next morning to quiet. Too quiet. The couch was empty. The blanket she'd been sleeping under was folded neatly over the armrest. Her suitcase was gone. So was her phone charger, her jacket, her toothbrush in the bathroom. The only thing she left behind was a yellow sticky note on the fridge. "You're safer without me." The words sat heavy in my chest. I read them over and over, like they might rearrange themselves into something less final. For the first few days, I convinced myself she'd text or call or walk through the door like nothing had happened. I checked my phone constantly. Every unknown number made my heart lurch, half hope, half dread. But the days stretched into weeks and the silence stayed. Sometimes, walking home from class, I'd feel like I was being watched. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the faces in passing cars. I never saw the SUV again, but that didn't mean it wasn't out there. It's been over 2 years now. I haven't heard from Harper. I tell myself she got away, that she's living somewhere warm and anonymous, maybe under a different name. But there's another part of me, the part that remembers the look in her eyes that night in the diner, that wonders if she ran far enough. And every so often, when my phone rings from a blocked number, I let it go to voicemail. Because if it's her, I'm not sure which version of the truth I'll have to hear. Sometimes loyalty means standing beside your friends no matter what. But there are moments when the danger they carry can spill over onto you. And the bravest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to step back. You can care deeply for someone and still protect your own life. It's not abandonment, it's survival. I was 20 the first time I set foot in Sapphire Hills, a quiet neighborhood just outside Flagstaff, bright stucco homes, even rows of magnolia trees, driveways so clean they looked power-washed daily. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted quiet without questions. Safe, quiet, forgettable. Just the way I liked it. My name's Kayla Brenner. I was a second-year nursing student working weekends to afford a room I barely spent time in. I didn't go out much. Never really did, not since I was 15 and my little brother drowned while I was supposed to be watching him. No one blamed me, not openly, but my family was never the same after that. I carried that silence into adulthood. Babysitting helped fill the space. Other people's homes, other people's kids. Quiet, temporary responsibility. No real risk. The Clearys came from a referral. A girl from my pathophysiology class said they were easy money. Low maintenance, big tippers. The dad barely speaks, just don't ask too many questions. I texted them and got a fast reply. That Saturday, May 6th, I was scheduled from 5:30 p.m. to just past midnight. The house sat near the back of the cul-de-sac. Beige walls, deep green shutters, and those fake candles glowing in the windows. I rang the doorbell, and Mrs. Cleary answered right away. Tall, pin-straight posture, dressed in a navy pantsuit like she was ready for court. Mr. Cleary stood behind her, silent, holding the car keys. "This is Eli," she said, motioning to the small boy clinging to her leg. "Grandmother a couple months ago, still adjusting. 6. He's quiet. Lost his." She handed me a typed list of instructions. Dinner times, bedtime routine, emergency numbers. Then, softer. "If the hallway lights flicker, reset the breaker near the laundry, and don't open the green room." "The guest room?" I asked. She nodded. "It hasn't been used since last year. He doesn't go in there anymore." They left without hugs or fuss. The front door closed behind them with a strange finality. I turned to Eli. He just stood there, blinking slowly, his hands clasped tight in front of him. For the first hour, everything went fine. I warmed up a small plate of baked ziti from the fridge, cut his carrots into coin shapes, and sat with him while he drew with dull crayons on the living room rug. He never said a word, but he wasn't difficult. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that made you forget what voices sound like. Then, at 7:15, he stopped drawing. His crayon rolled from his fingers, unnoticed. I looked up to find him staring down the hallway. The light outside the green room door was flickering. One bulb, like a heartbeat. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer, just turned and slowly crawled behind the couch. I stood uneasy and walked toward the breaker like I'd been told. The green room door was shut, but beneath it leaked a soft, dull glow. Not harsh like a lamp, more like the walls themselves were pulsing. The kind of light that made you feel watched, even alone. I didn't touch the door. I didn't even pause. I reset the breaker, even though nothing looked tripped, and walked back. Eli was still behind the couch, watching me. He pointed to the paper where he'd been drawing. A new figure had appeared there, tall, draped in black with no eyes. She stood in a hallway soaked in green. "Who's that?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. The hours blurred into each other. By 8:40, the air in the house had changed. He hadn't eaten since dinner. Just sat, curled up by the couch, watching the hallway like he expected something to crawl out of it. Then, without warning, Eli whispered, "She comes when it's quiet." I froze. My whole body went still. "Who does?" I asked. His eyes met mine for the first time all night. "Grandma. Mom locked her in when she got sick." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What do you mean, locked her in?" But he was done. He turned away and started humming to himself, low and rhythmic, like he was trying to keep something out. I stayed close, phone in hand, but I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I knew, somewhere deep in my gut, that whatever this was, the Clearys already knew. By 9:30, the green shimmer pulsed again, stronger this time. Not just under the door, but along the edges of the frame, like it was seeping into the hallway itself. I checked the breaker again, praying for something logical. Still fine. I sat awake for the next 3 hours, alert to every noise. Eli eventually fell asleep on the couch, thumb in mouth, sketchpad clutched to his chest. I wrapped him in a blanket and tried to breathe slow, but the green light wouldn't stop. It dimmed, flickered, brightened, like a living thing waiting for someone to answer it. At 12:30 a.m., the front door finally opened. Mr. and Mrs. Cleary walked in, not dressed for a wedding. They wore black, heavy fabrics, not a speck of color. "How was he?" Mrs. Cleary asked. "Quiet," I said. "Mostly drew. Ate okay." She nodded. Mr. Cleary said nothing. He never looked at me, just walked toward the hallway. I hesitated, then asked, as calmly as I could, "Thought it wasn't used anymore?" "Hey," the guest room light kept flickering. Mrs. Cleary didn't flinch. "That room hasn't had power since last June." I stared at her. She walked past me like I hadn't spoken. I took the cash on the counter and left without saying goodbye. My hands shook on the steering wheel all the way home. I couldn't stop thinking of the green glow, the eyeless woman, the quiet hum Eli made like a shield. The next morning, I texted Mrs. Cleary, just a polite message. "Thanks again for the opportunity. Let me know if you ever need a sitter." No reply. A few days later, I asked the classmate who referred me if she'd heard from them. "They moved," she said, "like overnight. House is for rent now." I checked the Zillow listing. Sure enough, vacant, staged, no mention of a green guest room. Weeks passed, school picked up. I told myself it had just been an old house with a weird light. Maybe Eli was just a traumatized kid drawing scary things like kids do. Maybe grief does strange things to families. But one Saturday, I went for a run in a neighborhood on the other side of town. I slowed down by a big 2-story house with ivy up the porch rails. Second floor, guest room window. I stopped. A pale green shimmer pulsed behind the glass, and in the window, a small figure stood watching me. Some homes carry grief like wallpaper. Layered, faded, easy to ignore if you don't look too closely. But when silence sits too long, it calls things back. Not always ghosts, not always spirits, but memories that refuse to stay buried. Sometimes the most dangerous things aren't what you hear, but what you almost didn't. Trust the stillness. Listen when the quiet gets too loud. And never ever ignore the door they told you not to open. It's strange how something as simple as a job can give shape to a life that feels like it's unraveling. After I dropped out of college, I lost track of time for a while. One day bled into the next. I started babysitting because it gave me structure, a reason to be somewhere, to be someone, even if just for a few hours. Ridgegate Meadows was the kind of place that practically whispered, "We don't talk to strangers here." Gated, uniform, hushed. No laughter from yards, no breeze shifting curtains. The Delaney's house stood at the far end of a curved street, its windows closed like eyes that didn't trust what they'd seen. I was early. Always am. Mrs. Delaney opened the door exactly 1 minute after my knock. She was tall, crisp. Her hair didn't move, and neither did her voice. "Hi, Monica. Thank you for being on time. Parker is already showered. Dinner is labeled. He sleeps by 8:30. Strictly. No deviation, please. And no devices in his room. Don't let him open the office door." The office door was behind her, sleek black, padlocked. She said it so casually, like she was telling me where the recycling bin was. Parker peeked out from behind her. 7 years old, maybe. Pale, thin, not shy exactly, just too composed. He waved, didn't smile. As she left, Mrs. Delaney barely looked at her son, just handed me a sealed envelope and a keychain with a small silver whistle. "Only use that if there's an emergency, the kind that really matters." And then she was gone. Inside the house, everything was sterile, not clean, sterile, like a hospital pretending to be a home. Every wall held laminated routine cards with precise time blocks. 5 m, quiet time. 5:15, homework review. 5:45, gratitude writing. 6 m, dinner. 6:30, story practice. 7 u, emotion charting. 8 u, teeth check. 30, sleep. No flexibility, no joy. Parker followed it like he was wired for it. I didn't even have to ask. At 5:15, he pulled out his math workbook. At 5:45, he sat at the table with a lined journal and wrote 3 things he was grateful for. his house, the calendar, and quiet. Dinner was a gluten-free tray marked with his name and the date. I tried making conversation. "You like school?" He didn't answer. At 6:30, he took out a red folder labeled Story Practice. Inside were stapled packets of typed stories. Weird ones. Formal. Cold. They read like scripts from old training films. The one he picked that night ended with, "Even if mommy's tired, we keep the promise. We don't open the office door again." I blinked. "Did you write these?" He shook his head. "I copy them. I get in trouble if I don't say them right." At 7:10, while he brushed his teeth, a light flicked on behind the black office door. Just a flash, like someone turned on a lamp and changed their mind. Parker froze. His toothbrush clattered into the sink. "Did someone go in there?" I asked. He whispered, "No one's allowed in there. But sometimes Mommy talks to herself in there. She says it's where the mistake happened." I didn't press. I didn't want him to shut down. By 8:20, Parker was already in bed, lying so still he didn't even blink as I said goodnight. I sat in the hallway outside his room, scrolling through nothing on my phone, but the house didn't let you forget it was watching. At 9:35, the office door creaked. Just a breath of movement. The padlock was undone, dangling. I knew I hadn't touched it. Then came the voice, low, rough. "You always ruin it. You always break it." I stood slowly. The door opened a few inches like it was inviting me. Inside was dim. One desk, 2 chairs, a broken baby monitor blinking red. Pinned to the back wall was a printed note. Trial 3, Monica. Observation begins. My name. I stepped back like something had bitten me. I turned, and Parker was there, barefoot, watching. "She only lets people in when she's tired of the way they babysit me," he said softly. Girl didn't follow the sleep rule. She cried when she read her name too. The last, my mouth opened, but no words came. He blinked at me, then walked back to his room like he hadn't just said something completely unreal. I stayed in the entryway after that, clutching my bag. I didn't try to call anyone. I didn't move. I just watched the clock inch toward 1 a.m., waiting to leave without making noise. The office door never closed, but nothing else happened. At 1:10 a.m., the front door opened and Mrs. Delaney stepped in like she hadn't been gone at all. Her lipstick was still perfect. Her eyes weren't tired, just hollow. "Did he sleep on time?" "Yes," I said. "Did you enter the office?" "No." She stared at me for a moment too long, then smiled, but not kindly. "As well as you." "Good. Most girls don't lie." She handed me a white envelope. "We'll call if we need you again." I nodded, stepped outside, and didn't breathe until I was in my car. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. 200 in crisp bills, and one of Parker's story cards. On the back, written in uneven pencil, "If Monica tells, she'll go in the office forever too." I never went back. I didn't text her. She never texted me. I never saw the job posted again. Not in the usual groups, not on the apps. Sometimes when I'm alone, I wonder if there was even a trial 1 or trial 2. Or if Parker writes the story cards himself when no one's watching. I've Googled their address more times than I can count. The Zillow listing is locked. The Google Street View is old, frozen in 2019, no black office door visible. Some nights I reread the card, wondering if it's a threat or a plea. Structure can save you, until it doesn't. Until the routine becomes a trap, a mask, a weapon. I wanted order, a place where nothing unpredictable could hurt me. But Ridgegate Meadows taught me something else. Sometimes what looks like perfect order is just control wearing makeup. Not every well-behaved child is okay. Not every house that runs on time is safe. Trust your gut. And if a door is locked for the wrong reasons, don't wait for it to open. Leave before it does.